What makes a weapon more than just wood and steel and mechanical precision? When you're clearing houses in a destroyed French village, when every doorway could hide an enemy soldier with a machine gun, when combat happens at ranges measured in feet rather than yards and split-second reaction time means the difference between killing and being killed, what do you want in your hands? Can a weapon become a lifeline? Something you trust more than your own judgment? Something that transforms from a tool into a companion that keeps you alive through the worst night of your life? I'm 97 years old, and in July 1944 I carried a Thompson submachine gun through the ruins of Saint-Lô during some of the most vicious urban combat American forces faced in France. That Thompson, that heavy, reliable, bullet-spitting machine, saved my life and the lives of my squad dozens of times in a single night of house-to-house fighting. This is the story of why the Thompson became a lifeline, why close-quarters combat in urban terrain demanded a weapon that could deliver overwhelming firepower in confined spaces, why I owe my survival to a gun designed by a man who'd never seen the kind of warfare his creation would dominate. My name is William Robert Hayes, and I was a 24-year-old sergeant in the 29th Infantry Division in July 1944, fighting through Normandy in the brutal campaign to break out of the beachhead and capture the communication hub of Saint-Lô. The battle for Saint-Lô would become one of the bloodiest urban battles of the Normandy campaign. A week of house-to-house fighting through rubble and ruins, American infantry clawing for every building against German paratroopers who'd fortified the town and were determined to hold it regardless of cost. The fighting would cost thousands of casualties on both sides, would reduce the medieval town to rubble, and would test American infantry tactics and equipment in ways that training had never prepared us for. I'd been issued a Thompson submachine gun, formerly designated the M1A1 Thompson, after our company commander observed my performance during the hedgerow fighting and decided I'd be more valuable with a weapon suited for close-quarters combat. The Thompson was a selective fire submachine gun chambered in .45 ACP, the same powerful pistol cartridge used in the M1A1 pistol, feeding from either a 20-round box magazine or a 30-round box magazine. It fired at about 700 rounds per minute on full automatic, had an effective range of maybe 50 yards, and weighed nearly 11 pounds empty, making it one of the heaviest submachine guns in service. But that weight gave it controllability on full automatic that lighter weapons couldn't match. And the .45 ACP round, while lacking range and penetration, had tremendous stopping power at close quarters, could knock a man down with a single hit, could punch through light cover. The Thompson had a complicated history, having been designed by John T. Thompson after World War I as a trench broom for clearing enemy trenches, arriving too late for that war but finding a market with law enforcement, and, notoriously, with criminals during Prohibition. By World War II, the Thompson had been simplified and made easier to manufacture, losing some of the elegant machining of the original 1928 model, but retaining the reliability and firepower that made it valuable. It was expensive and time-consuming to produce, which limited its distribution, but the units that received Thompsons treasured them, particularly for the kind of close-quarters combat where the weapon excelled. I'd trained with the Thompson for about 2 weeks before Saint-Lô, learned its characteristics, learned to control the powerful recoil on full automatic, learned to change magazines quickly, learned the immediate action drills for the few malfunctions the weapon experienced. The Thompson was heavier than the M1 Garand rifle most infantrymen carried less ammunition per magazine, and had far less effective range. But in close quarters, in buildings and bunkers and trenches, the Thompson was king, could deliver more firepower faster than any rifle, could clear a room in seconds, could give one man the firepower of 4 or 5 riflemen in the critical first moments of an engagement. Saint-Lô sits on a hill overlooking the Vire River, a medieval town that in 1944 was a critical road junction connecting various parts of Normandy. The Germans had fortified it heavily, positioned their elite Fallschirmjäger paratroopers there, prepared defensive positions in every building and ruin. By the time American forces reached the outskirts in early July, the town had already been devastated by Allied bombing and artillery, reduced to what soldiers would call the capital of ruins. But ruins are easier to defend than intact buildings, provide more cover and concealment, create kill zones and ambush sites at every intersection. The Germans had turned Saint-Lô into a fortress, and we'd have to take it building by building, room by room, cellar by cellar. My company entered St. Lo on the night of July 17, 1944, part of a general assault to capture the town before German reinforcements could arrive. We advanced through rubble-choked streets, past burning buildings and collapsed walls, under constant fire from German machine guns and snipers positioned in the ruins. The noise was overwhelming, small arms fire echoing off stone walls, artillery and mortars creating a constant background roar, buildings collapsing with crashes that shook the ground. And through it all, we moved forward, squad by squad, taking casualties, leaving wounded men for medics, pushing deeper into the town because stopping meant dying, and the only way out was through. My squad's first objective was a partially collapsed apartment building that German forces were using as a strongpoint. Machine guns positioned to cover a major intersection that we needed to cross. Standard procedure for taking a fortified building was to suppress it with rifle and machine gun fire, hit it with artillery or air support if available, then assault with infantry using grenades and rifles. But St. Lo was too damaged, too close quarters, too chaotic for standard procedures. Artillery would be as dangerous to us as to the Germans. Air support was impossible at night in urban terrain. We'd have to take that building the hard way, clear it room by room with small arms and grenades and whatever courage we could muster. I gathered my squad, 8 men armed with a mix of M1 Garands, a bar, and my Thompson, and briefed them on what we were about to do. We'd assault through the ground floor entrance, clear the ground floor rooms, then work our way up to the upper floors where the machine guns were positioned. Standard room clearing doctrine, except we'd be doing it in darkness, in unfamiliar terrain, against an enemy that knew the building and had prepared defenses. Half of us wouldn't make it. That was the brutal calculus of urban combat. But if we didn't take that building, the entire company advance would stall and more men would die in the intersection that the German machine guns commanded. We moved up to the building under cover of smoke grenades, reached the entrance without taking casualties, and I was first through the door because I had the Thompson, the weapon best suited for what we were about to face. The interior was dark, lit only by fires from outside filtering through broken windows, creating shadows and confusion. I moved forward carefully, Thompson at shoulder, finger on the trigger, scanning for movement or threats. The first room was empty except for rubble. The second room was empty. The third room contained 3 German soldiers who opened fire the instant I appeared in the doorway. I fired the Thompson on full automatic, a 3-second burst that emptied half the 30-round magazine, 45 ACP rounds filling the confined space with thunder. Brass casings ejecting in a stream, muzzle flash illuminating the room in strobing light. All 3 Germans went down, hit multiple times by the heavy slugs, and I was already moving forward, stepping over bodies, clearing the next room. Behind me, my squad was following, moving from room to room, checking corners and closets and any place an enemy could hide. The Thompson's rapid fire gave me the ability to saturate spaces with lead, to hit multiple targets faster than any rifleman could, to suppress and destroy before the enemy could effectively return fire. We cleared the ground floor in maybe 5 minutes, killed 8 German soldiers, took no casualties ourselves because the Thompson's firepower gave us an overwhelming advantage in every encounter. But we'd also announced our presence, and the Germans on the upper floors knew we were coming. They'd be waiting ready, positioned to kill us the moment we started up the stairs. Going up those stairs would be suicide. But it was necessary suicide. The kind of calculated risk that urban combat demanded constantly. I led the way up the staircase, moving slowly. Thompson aimed up toward the landing, knowing that at any second German fire could tear down the stairwell and kill me before I could react. At the first landing, a German soldier appeared with a rifle, and I fired instinctively, a short burst that hit him center mass and dropped him. But his fall alerted the other Germans, and suddenly we were taking fire from multiple positions, machine gun fire and rifle fire pouring down the stairwell, pinning us on the landing, killing Private Morrison, who'd been right behind me. We were stuck, couldn't advance into that fire, couldn't retreat without abandoning our mission, and every second we stayed there, more Germans were reinforcing the upper floor. I made a decision born of desperation rather than tactical thinking. I pulled every grenade I had, 4 fragmentation grenades, pulled the pins, and threw them up the stairwell one after another. 4 explosions in rapid succession that filled the upper floor with fragmentation and concussion. Then, while the Germans were stunned or wounded or dead from the grenades, I charged up the stairs firing the Thompson on full automatic, spraying bullets into the smoke and dust, hitting anything that moved or looked like it might be an enemy position. It was insane. Tactically unsound, should have gotten me killed. But the combination of grenades and the Thompson's rapid fire gave me just enough advantage, created just enough shock, that I made it to the upper floor alive. The upper floor was a nightmare of wounded and dead Germans, destroyed positions, smoke and dust so thick I could barely see. I kept moving, kept firing, trusting the Thompson to deliver rounds where I needed them, relying on muscle memory and instinct because there was no time to think. My squad came up behind me, and together we cleared the upper floor in brutal close-quarters combat, killing Germans in rooms and hallways and behind makeshift barricades. The Thompson was perfect for this, allowing me to engage multiple targets rapidly, to transition from one threat to another faster than any rifle could, to deliver stopping power that ended fights in seconds rather than prolonged exchanges of fire. We took the building, secured it, and immediately started taking fire from another German position across the street. There was no rest, no pause, just continuous combat as we moved from objective to objective, clearing buildings and positions through that long July night. I went through 5 30-round magazines in the first hour, 150 rounds, and constantly scrounged ammunition from casualties and supply runners, always worried about running out because the Thompson's high rate of fire consumed ammunition faster than I could carry. The second building we assaulted was worse than the first, a 3-story structure where Germans had fortified each floor and were prepared to defend to the death. We used the same tactics, grenades and rapid fire. Overwhelming firepower delivered faster than the enemy could respond. But this time we took casualties. 3 men killed and 2 wounded in the stairwell assaults, the price of taking fortified positions with infantry alone. I was hit twice, grazing wounds from German rifle fire. Nothing serious but bleeding and painful. And I kept fighting because stopping meant dying and there were still Germans to kill and buildings to clear. The Thompson saved my life multiple times that night in ways that a rifle couldn't have. In one room I encountered 4 German soldiers who'd been waiting in ambush, and only the Thompson's ability to fire rapidly and hit multiple targets kept them from killing me before I could react. In a hallway, a German soldier charged me with a bayonet, and the Thompson's stopping power dropped him mid-charge, the 45 ACP rounds hitting with enough force to stop his momentum. In a cellar, I stumbled into a German machine gun position in complete darkness, and firing the Thompson on full automatic in the general direction of the threat eliminated the position before they could return effective fire. By dawn on July 18th, my squad had cleared 7 buildings, had killed an estimated 40 German soldiers, had held every position we'd taken against counterattacks. We'd started with 8 men and finished with 4, half our strength casualties, but we'd accomplished our mission. And I'd fired over 400 rounds through my Thompson, gone through 14 magazines, used that weapon more than any other piece of equipment to keep myself and my remaining squad alive. After the immediate fighting ended and we'd been pulled back for rest and resupply, I sat against a rubble pile and examined my Thompson. It was covered in dirt and blood. The barrel was hot enough to burn despite hours since my last shots, and the action was gritty from powder residue and dust. But it had functioned perfectly through the entire night, hadn't jammed once, hadn't failed me when my life depended on it. I field stripped it, cleaned it carefully, checked every component, and thanked whatever divine force watches over soldiers that I'd been given this particular weapon for this particular battle. The battle for St. Lo continued for days, my company fighting building to building. My squad rebuilt with replacements who died and were replaced again, but I kept my Thompson, refused to surrender it even when other weapons became available, because I'd learned what it could do, had seen how it performed when everything depended on firepower and reliability. That Thompson became an extension of myself, a tool I knew intimately, a weapon I trusted more than my own judgment. The Thompson had disadvantages that became apparent over time. It was heavy. Carrying it on long marches was exhausting. It consumed ammunition at a rate that logistics couldn't always sustain. Its effective range was limited, making it useless in the open terrain fighting we'd face after St. Lo. But in urban combat, in the close-quarters nightmare of room clearing and street fighting, the Thompson was supreme, was the weapon you wanted in your hands when the distances were measured in feet and the reaction times in fractions of seconds. I carried that Thompson through the rest of the Normandy campaign, through the liberation of Paris, through the winter fighting in the Vosges Mountains. It saved my life dozens more times, became so much a part of me that using any other weapon felt wrong, felt like betraying a trusted friend. I fired thousands of rounds through it, wore out barrels and springs that were replaced by armorers, but kept the same receiver, the same basic weapon that had brought me through St. Lo alive. After the war ended and I came home in 1945, I tried to keep my Thompson, wanted that piece of equipment that had meant so much, that had saved my life so many times. But the Army had strict policies about war souvenirs, particularly weapons, and I was forced to turn in my Thompson at the demobilization center. I watched it go into a crate with dozens of other Thompsons, all of them probably destined to be scrapped or sold as surplus, and I felt like I was losing a piece of myself. That particular weapon, that individual Thompson that had been issued to me and that I'd carried for 9 months of combat, was gone, and I'd never see it again. But the memory of what that weapon could do, what it meant in close-quarters combat, stayed with me forever. I'd seen men with rifles struggle in urban combat, seen the limitations of bolt action and even semi-automatic weapons in confined spaces where engagement times were seconds. The Thompson's ability to deliver rapid fire, its stopping power, its reliability under the worst conditions, made it the perfect weapon for house-to-house fighting. It wasn't the best weapon for every situation, wasn't the right choice for long-range combat or open terrain. But when you needed to clear a room or defend a position at close quarters, when overwhelming firepower in a short time was more important than accuracy or range, the Thompson was unmatched. I went on to have a normal life after the war, married in 1947, raised 3 children, worked as a construction foreman for 35 years. But I never forgot St. Lo, never forgot that night of house-to-house fighting, never forgot what the Thompson had meant. I'd join other veterans at VFW meetings, and invariably the conversation would turn to weapons, to what we'd carried and what we'd trusted. The men who'd carried Thompsons in urban combat all shared similar stories, similar appreciation for what that weapon could do. It became a bond between us, recognition that we'd faced the worst kind of combat with the right tool for the job. In the 1960s, I bought a semi-automatic Thompson from a surplus dealer, a civilian version that fired only 1 shot per trigger pull, legal to own, but lacking the full automatic capability that had made the weapon so effective. But holding it, feeling the weight and balance working the action, brought back memories so vivid I could smell the powder smoke and hear the brass casings hitting stone floors. My wife asked why I needed it, what purpose it served, and I couldn't explain that it wasn't about need. It was about memory, about honoring a weapon that had kept me alive, about maintaining a connection to a part of my life that had defined me. I'm 97 years old now, and that semi-automatic Thompson sits in my gun safe, cleaned and maintained, never fired in anger but treasured as a reminder. My children will inherit it when I'm gone, probably won't understand its significance, might sell it to a collector who'll appreciate it as a historical artifact but won't know what it meant to carry one in combat. That's fine, that's how time works. Memories fade and significance is lost, and the next generation moves on. But I'm telling this story now, while I still can, while the memories are still sharp, so that someone will know why the Thompson submachine gun became a lifeline, why it mattered so much to the men who carried it in close-quarters combat. The Thompson wasn't the most advanced weapon of World War II, wasn't the most accurate or the longest-ranged or the easiest to manufacture, but it was the right weapon for urban combat in 1944, was the tool that American infantry needed for the house-to-house fighting that characterized so much of the European campaign. Its heavy .45 ACP rounds could penetrate light cover and had tremendous stopping power. Its selective fire capability allowed precise single shots when needed, and overwhelming rapid fire when the situation demanded. Its weight, which made it burdensome on the march, made it controllable on full automatic, and its reliability, the product of careful design and quality manufacturing, meant it worked when working was the difference between life and death. John T. Thompson died in 1940, never saw his weapon's finest hour, never knew that the submachine gun he designed for World War I trench warfare would find its true calling in World War II urban combat. He'd wanted to create a weapon that would end trench warfare, that would break stalemates, that would save lives by making attacks more efficient. He failed at that goal, arrived too late for WWI, and his weapon found other uses in the interwar years. But in WW1, in places like St. Lo and Aachen and Manila and 100 other ruined cities, the Thompson did exactly what Thompson had envisioned. It gave infantry overwhelming firepower in close quarters. It made attacks possible that would otherwise have failed, and it saved lives by ending fights quickly and decisively. The men I lost that night in St. Lo, Morrison and Chen and Davis and Rodriguez, died because even with the Thompson's advantages, urban combat is brutally costly, demands blood and sacrifice regardless of equipment. But the four of us who survived, myself and Martinez and O'Brien and Thompson, we survived largely because I had a weapon suited to the fighting we faced, because the Thompson gave us advantages that rifles couldn't match in that specific context. I've thought about that countless times over 79 years, wondered if we'd have made it with different weapons, wondered if my lost friends would have survived if we'd all had Thompsons instead of just me. No way to know. But I believe the Thompson made the difference. Believe that weapon was the reason 4 men walked out of St. Lo when 8 had walked in. The Thompson submachine gun was phased out after WE2, replaced by lighter and more modern designs, relegated to obsolescence by changing tactics and new technologies. But for the men who carried it in combat, who trusted it in desperate situations, who survived because of what it could do, the Thompson remained the gold standard, the weapon against which all others were judged. I've fired modern submachine guns and assault rifles at ranges and gun shows, impressive weapons with better ergonomics and higher capacities and more advanced features. But none of them feel right. None of them have the weight and the solidity and the presence of the Thompson. Maybe that's just nostalgia. Maybe I'm romanticizing a weapon because it's tied to memories that shaped my life. But I don't think so. I think the Thompson really was special, really was the right weapon at the right time, really was a lifeline for men fighting the worst kind of combat imaginable. When I die, which will be soon, I want my Thompson, the semi-automatic civilian version that sits in my safe, to be donated to a military museum where it can educate future generations about what these weapons meant to the men who carried them. I want a plaque that explains what the Thompson could do in urban combat, what it meant during the battle for St. Lo, why it mattered to American infantry fighting through French villages in 1944. That's the legacy I want to leave, not just my own story, but the story of a weapon that saved lives and won battles and deserves to be remembered for more than its association with gangsters and prohibition. The night the Thompson became a lifeline in St. Lo, the night I learned what that weapon could do and what it meant to carry one in the worst fighting imaginable, that night shaped everything that came after. It taught me about the importance of having the right tool for the job, about the difference that equipment can make in combat, about the debt we owe to designers and manufacturers who create weapons that keep soldiers alive. John T. Thompson never saw St. Lo, never knew his submachine gun would become essential for urban combat, never received the thanks of the thousands of soldiers whose lives his design helped save. But his legacy lives in the memories of men like me, men who carried his weapon in combat and came home because of what it could do. If this story moved you, if it helped you understand why specific weapons mattered to specific soldiers in specific situations, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe to hear more stories from World War II veterans. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember the Thompson submachine gun and what it meant to American infantry in urban combat. Remember the men who carried it through the ruins of French villages. Remember that equipment matters and that the right tool in the right hands at the right time can mean the difference between life and death. Thank you for listening to this old soldier's memories of a weapon that became a lifeline, a tool that became a trusted companion, a piece of equipment that earned permanent respect through performance under the worst conditions imaginable.